Today, let's talk about how does U.S. estate tax work for foreigners and non-resident aliens. So, if a foreigner or non-resident alien died owning U.S. accounts, then the estate may owe U.S. estate tax. So, and also, any U.S. bank or brokerage will actually need some sort of proof of tax clearance before they'll release any funds to you or the family or the heirs. So today, let's talk about first, when does U.S. estate tax apply? Two, how much is U.S. estate tax? And then three, we'll go over what are the steps to get U.S. estate tax clearance. All right. So first, let's talk about when does U.S. estate tax apply? Bottom line, just if I could sum it up in a number, it's U.S. assets over $60,000. So just for example, if you have somebody who who's not a U.S. citizen and lived in the UK, let's say, but because they wanted to have some U.S. dollars or some currency, some different currencies in their portfolio, they had a U.S. savings account or brokerage account of, let's say, $100,000. In that case, yes, they would owe an estate tax because it's over $60,000. And same would apply for many other countries and many other amounts. But the key elements are it's somebody who's not a U.S. citizen and lived abroad, did not live or did not die a resident of the United States, and their assets were over $60,000. Okay. Next, let's talk about how much is the actual estate tax. So it starts at 26%, and it goes up. It goes up higher and higher. I think the highest is 40% currently, and this is after deductions. So if you have a U.S. account, if you're non-resident or if your foreign estate has a U.S. account of, let's say, $70,000, but you have over $10,000 in U.S. deductions, maybe a funeral bill, maybe the U.S. lawyers, this and that, you may not owe any estate tax, but you'll still have to file. Although, again, you may not owe taxes, but you will still have to file. Okay. So before we get into what are the steps for getting that U.S. estate tax clearance, we cover a lot of these topics and just probate in general in my book, How Probate Works, available on Amazon. It's a nice high-level overview, both for the executor's side of things and the heirs. So depending on what your role is in the situation, maybe you want to know how to go about dealing with the probate as the executor, or if you're just an heir, sort of anxious to know what's going on, you maybe feel a little bit in the dark. I wrote this book specifically for that situation, for those situations. All right, so the first step of getting tax clearance is getting the death certificate. And first, let me point out that the point of all this is to get some sort of documentation from or proof from the IRS that the bank is actually allowed to release the funds. Because if not, then the bank is liable for the estate tax, and they don't want that, right? So their whole thing is making sure that they're in the clear so that they can cut a check to you or the family. So first, you need a death certificate. Again, this whole list that I'm going down is going to be all the items you need to get that tax clearance. First, you need a death certificate. You got to prove the person's passed away. And in many instances, if you're from a non-English speaking country, you're going to need an official translation of the death certificate. So you're going to need an original certified death certificate, not a photocopy, and it has to have an official translation. And when I say official translation, I mean a lot of folks try to get by with maybe their sister speaks English quite well and Spanish or whatever the case may be, and they write up their translation of the certificate. And although that technically you can do that, I mean there's just so many elements that a professional translator will know and know how to do it properly and just save you a lot of time. Just get the professional translator, and it'll cost you maybe $100, maybe less, for a 1-page or 2-page death certificate. So in my opinion, it's very much worth it to just avoid the headaches. All right, so once you have the original death certificate, next step is to go to probate court. You need a U.S. appointed executor. So even if you had an executor appointed in the country where the person passed away, let's say using the UK again, let's say the person passed away in the UK and there was a grant of probate, which they call it over there, to set up the estate in the UK, you still need to do a U.S. probate. And here it's called an ancillary probate. And what that means is that the U.S. courts have reviewed the UK court proceedings, okayed it, whatever, and respect the decision of the UK court and commiserately name that same person or a different person as the U.S. executor. So the UK grant of probate will create a UK executor, whereas the US court will create a US executor. I know it's just a lot of jurisdictions, a lot of different countries and laws. So that's what you have to do through the US court. So usually, if you don't know, in the United States, if you're from a different country, you might not be familiar. The United States is cut up into 50 different states, 50 different jurisdictions. And what you need to do is you need to choose which state's probate court you're going to apply in. And for the most part, New York is kind of one of the best choices, only because, I mean, any major financial institution or almost every major financial institution has some sort of connection to New York. So you're pretty safe choosing New York as your court of venue. Also, the New York probate courts are fairly sophisticated because they just have so much volume and just so many, I guess, high stakes estates passing through them. Just the personnel, just they're very savvy. They know what they're doing. So you get a smoother process than you might in other areas. You also need, when you're doing this process of appointing a U.S. executor, you need that executor to be a U.S. citizen and ideally living in the New York area in this case. Because a lot of folks are from abroad and maybe have never even been to New York or the United States at all, meaning the surviving family or heirs, this type of situation is usually well suited for working with a professional executor. I am a professional executor. That's an attorney or maybe a trust company or a bank who will help settle your affairs in lieu of maybe a family member or a friend. And these are complicated matters, and for that reason, a professional executor makes a lot of sense. And you might not know anybody here in the United States who's both a citizen and who has the time or the savvy to do this for you. Yeah. So then after you have a translated death certificate and a court-appointed U.S. executor, the next step is to pay the U.S. estate tax. So if your estate if your U.S. account is over $60,000, then yes, you're going to owe some estate tax. So you file what's called the 706NA. That's the tax form, the IRS tax form for non-resident alien estates. And you'll work with an accountant or an attorney. Usually you work with an attorney for these types of things. They're a little complicated. And you file them. You'll wait several months for the IRS to process and get back to you. So there is a bit of a waiting period. But at the end of it all, you'll get two things. You'll get a closing letter from the IRS, which says, okay, we've received your tax filing. We acknowledge that you did it correctly. Good for you. And you don't owe anything. Or you've paid everything that you owe. Or you'll get a federal transfer certificate. And this is important because you may not have the money to pay the tax that's owed. Let's say the estate was, the U.S. accounts are $200,000 and you owe, I guess, what would that be? Maybe $30,000 in U.S. estate tax before you can get the balance of $170,000. You might not have that money available. So what you can do is you can get instead a federal transfer certificate when you file your 706NA. And that basically says to the bank, you can release this remainder, but this other part, this, in our example, $30,000, you need to send to us, to the IRS, as payment for tax due. So that way, you don't have to come up with a tax out of pocket. You're just instructing the bank to cut two checks, one check to the IRS and one check to the estate, to the executor, right? And that's what the bank needs. The bank needs either a closing letter from the IRS saying, okay, whatever taxes were due, we've confirmed that's the correct amount and they've been properly paid, or they need confirmation that, okay, the IRS, we acknowledge that this is the amount that's due and that we'll accept that as direct payment from the bank, and then the bank can then release the balance to the executor. Now, in the alternative, there is, for estates that are under $60,000, the bank still needs some sort of clearance. And you might be wondering why. You're saying, hey, my account is only $50,000. Why won't Chase or Citibank just give me the money? And the reason is, think about it from the bank's perspective. That particular account may be, $50,000 or $40,000 below the $60,000 limit. But that bank has no way of knowing if there are other accounts out there. Maybe there's a Washington Mutual account that's another $30,000 that would put you over the limit. Maybe there's a Vanguard account that would put you over the limit. And that's why there needs to be some sort of formal filing with the U.S. taxing authorities, where somebody with legal authority, the U.S. executor, has made a sworn statement or a sworn filing. Hey, this is all there is, or this is all we could find at least, and that's why we believe this is the tax due and all the tax that's due. So in the case where it's under $60,000, you actually don't file the 706 NA, which is a tax form. You file a different set of forms, and you're just asking for the federal transfer certificates. So it's slightly different. I don't want to bore you with the technical details. Your attorney or tax accountant will do that for you. But it is slightly different, but the result is the same. You'll get a document to hand to the bank that gives them permission from the taxing authorities to release the funds from you. All right. So that's all we have today. Hopefully you found this helpful. Again, if you would like to learn more about the probate process in general, pick up a copy of my book, How Probate Works, available on Amazon. Otherwise, I'll talk to you next time. Take care. Bye now.